Christine by Stephen King. So if you know me, you will know that I have a pretty rocky relationship with Stephen King. I think he has written some truly masterful works, although at this point in time I think his glory days are far in the rearview mirror. Rearview mirror, car pun, get it. But anyway, so often he just disappoints me. The lackluster endings so many times, the complete lack of forethought put into those endings, the frequently self-indulgent pacing, the oftentimes lackluster prose. Over the years, Stephen King and I just had kind of a tumultuous relationship. However, Christine holds a special place in my heart, as it was the first Stephen King book that I ever read in its entirety. Now, the first Stephen King book that I ever actually picked up was Cujo, but I never finished reading that one because it was a library copy, and it appeared to be either like a first edition or very close to being a first edition paperback from like the 1980s, it looked like. And that thing gave up the ghost on me halfway through, and then pages just came flying out. So that copy was destroyed, and I never finished reading Cujo. But Christine was the next book by Stephen King that I picked up, and the first one that I read to completion. And I picked up this copy some time ago because I wanted to revisit Christine. I wanted to see if it held up and if I would still like it now as much as I did when I first read it back then. And you know what? Christine holds up. In fact, Christine holds up remarkably well, I think. This is going to be one of the very rare times when I can truly gush over a Stephen King book because I freaking loved Christine. In fact, I believe that Christine represents one of Stephen King's greatest accomplishments as a writer. And I guess that just goes to show how much of a contrarian I am, because Christine is kind of a book that gets slept on, I think, a lot. It's not really talked about all that much in comparison to a lot of Stephen King's other books. And it just kind of seems to me to be lost sometimes in the rest of his oeuvre. But I really do contend that this is actually one of his greatest achievements, I think. And I'm going to tell you why. So, what is the story of Christine, if you do not know? What tale does Christine tell? So, Christine tells the story of Arnie Cunningham. And Arnie Cunningham is that kid that just gets relentlessly shit upon in high school. He has bad complexion. I can sympathize with that myself. But he's also very meek, kind of awkward. He has no real friends except for Dennis Gilder, who serves as the book's partial narrator. Um, and he is just kind of that kid that just has the roughest possible time in high school. He gets picked on a lot, but he's very smart. He's also very good with his hands. He's very mechanically minded as the book goes on to events. And one day, as Dennis and Arnie are driving home in Dennis's car, they see a very, very beat up, in very rough condition, 1958 Plymouth Fury for sale, and Arnie appears to be smitten like that. He has to have this car. So he buys the car, much to his parents' chagrin, from the car's owner, a man named Roland D. LeBay, who, as we come to find out, is an evil son of a bitch. And Arnie takes the car home, and he sets about restoring the car, which is named Christine, because, like I said, he's very mechanically minded. And so Arnie seems to be just fanatically devoted to restoring this 1958 Plymouth Fury. And as he does so, some things begin to change about him. His complexion clears up. He begins to be much more assertive in his personality. And he even starts to date Lee Cabot, the prettiest girl in their high school. And he really seems to have just done a 180 in terms of character. And then we eventually learn that the car's former owner, named Roland D. LeBay, has died. However, it would appear that Roland D. LeBay's attachment to his car, Christine, runs pretty damn deep, and it would seem that he is not parting ways with his car, even though death has claimed him. He is sticking around, and that he is quite possibly haunting this car, Christine. And then some rather gruesome occurrences begin to happen as the people that set themselves against Arnie, the people that used to torment him and such, begin getting bumped off in grisly vehicular accidents. And it would seem that Christine, the car, may just be behind it all. So that's kind of the rough overview of the plot. The book is narrated somewhat uniquely. It alternates between first and third person narration. There's a prologue and an epilogue that bookend the majority of the work, but it's divided predominantly into three sections, the first and last of which are narrated in the first person by Dennis Gilder, Arnie's best friend, Arnie's only real friend. And they're presented as kind of like the memoir of what he went through regarding Arnie and his new car, Christine. And then the middle section is narrated in the third person. And this is something that I think a lot of people might have an issue with, but I didn't. In fact, I thought this was a mark in the book's favor, actually. The way it's narrated, I thought it was kind of adventurous, actually. And I think Stephen King is pretty adept at both first and third person narration. And I think he puts it to good effect in Christine. But let's talk about first the writing in Christine, because the writing is one aspect that I often kind of have an issue with when it comes to Stephen King, because damn, he likes to write in a really colloquial and at times really hokey and kind of at other times kind of cringy writing style. However, he doesn't do that so much in Christine. Sometimes reading a Stephen King book, I just kind of catch myself rolling my eyes at some of the things that he says in the books. It's just kind of hokey at times. But not so much in Christine. I'm not saying that this book is written necessarily in a completely different style from Stephen King's other books, but I think it's a little bit better. It's not, I didn't have so many eye rolling moments. The metaphors that he uses in here, the similes, are pretty good, actually. And all in all, I thought Christine was maybe a cut above your average Stephen King book in terms of the prose. It's still pretty street level. It's not, the most elevated, but it's not quite as corny as it is in some of his other books. So it gets a pass from me in terms of the writing. Now let's talk about the characters in this book, because that's where Stephen King almost always shines, is the characters. He really can write some really well-developed characters. In fact, I think Stephen King's books have maybe some of the best written characters of any books of their kind. That is, genre fiction, just, mainstream airport bus fare kind of books. I think that he really is a cut above a lot of other writers in terms of character writing, and Christine is no exception. The characters in Christine are decidedly human, and they're very well rendered as well. Dennis is kind of the jock who looks out for Arnie, because Arnie is kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum, but they kind of play well off each other. And the way that they interact with each other over the course of the book it rings really true to life. Stephen King has historically, I think, been an author who is very adept at writing young characters, and that's often not so easy to do as the author advances in age. They kind of, you kind of forget what it's like to be a kid. But I don't think Stephen King ever really did. And the kids in this book feel like real teenagers. They talk and act largely like real teenagers, I think. And they're very human, multifaceted in many ways. And I think this is just another knockout for Stephen King in terms of the characters. But let's also talk about the real reasons why I think Christine is one of Stephen King's greatest accomplishments. First off, the writing in the scenes where Christine violently murders the people that the car deems to be enemies of Arnie and itself. I think that's some of the best, or at least certainly some of the most effective writing that Stephen King ever did. That is exhilarating. When you get to the parts where Christine starts bumping off Ernie's enemies. That the writing in those sections is gripping. It really is. It is exhilarating. It's kind of edge of your seat reading. I loved it. And then let's talk about the entire concept of Christine. So this is a book that if it had been handled not quite so deftly, it could have come off being really, really stupid. I mean, it could have. Haunted house is one thing, but haunted car is another thing. And this book really had the potential to just be something stupid and kind of ridiculous, but it's not. And that's the beauty of it. Stephen King really sold this well. And this was kind of a hard sell. Possessed automobile is kind of, that can be a hard sell, but King pulled it off with remarkable aplomb, and I think this book is really quite rock solid. Actually, the writing again in the scenes where it goes full carnage, car pun again, is just really good, and it feels like it's more than the sum of its parts. Car pun again. I got some folks, but it really does feel like more than the sum of its parts because again you're talking about a book that's about a killer car, an evil car, and while that's not the first story of its kind, I think Christine might be the best story of that kind, because it's more than just that, and that's something that really elevates this book in my opinion, is that it's more than just a killer car story. It's a horror story. It's also a coming of age story. It's a love story. It's a tale of obsession that is nigh Melvillian in its proportions. But it's also a tragedy, and really a very moving tragedy at that. I was honestly kind of caught off guard by just how powerful I found Christine um, to be. It's actually pretty moving at parts, especially towards the end as Arnie gradually becomes possessed by the vengeful spirit of the car's former owner, the evil guy named LeBay. It kind of tugs at the heartstrings as you see this character who started out the story being so good and kind of just pure of heart be degraded into this twisted kind of fusion between a teenager and just a depraved old man. It really kind of gets to you, and I really think that this book is just again more than the sum of its parts, and also it has a little something under the hood. Yet another car pun. I'm telling you, I got some, but it really does have something kind of subtextual to offer, I think. The main theme of the book, as I took it to be, is the conflict between youth and age. There's a lot of anxiety within the character of Dennis in this book about growing up, because the book takes place in their senior year of high school as they're about to, go off the ledge of adolescence into adulthood. And in the sequences that Dennis narrates, he expresses a lot of anxiety about growing up, and it's really affecting. It really is, and also Christine, the car itself, becomes kind of a reflection of this. I think Christine is a 1958 Plymouth Fury. The book takes place in 1978, which is 20 years after the car would have first been manufactured. So that makes the car an antique, a classic car. And Christine, I took it to be, is kind of an artifact of age. It's something old, whereas the kids are, something new, and they're, afraid of growing old. They're afraid of kind of adulthood and mortality. And Christine kind of embodies all of that. It's something from an older age. It's something that's older than them. And it definitely embodies mortality because dang, does it rack up a body count over the course of this book. So honestly, I just thought that Christine is just kind of a marvelous little book, actually. Now, in terms of the negatives, the criticisms I can level against it, I honestly don't have that much. And again, that's a rarity for a Stephen King book. Um, it's on the longer side. This book, if you didn't know, it's pretty long. However, it's the rare Stephen King book where I can't really complain about that. The pacing is by and large pretty excellent. In fact, there's not much, if anything, that I really would say had to be or needed to be cut out of this. I think it's pretty good in the pacing, and the ending is actually good. Stephen King bungles the ending so often, but not with Christine. It ends the way a tragedy has to end, which is tragically. But there's in the epilogue sequence, the greatest way to end a horror story is with that little hint that things might not be resolved after all. And Christine nails that. There at the very end of the book, there's that one little hint that the problem might not have been solved after all, and that more and worse things might be coming down the pipe. So I think the ending, I think it stuck the landing. I think it pulled off the ending well. I think the pacing is good. But there is kind of a slight issue I had with it in the beginning, more so with how it sets up Arnie as a character. It lays it on a bit thick. So Dennis tells us that Arnie is basically a loser. He has no friends. He has bad acne. Um, he's awkward, ungainly. He's kind of just that kid that gets again shit on by life. But it lays it on a bit thick because when the book starts out, it tries to set up Arnie as this object of pity by having so many characters just kind of bulldoze over him. It's kind of cartoonish, actually. So after Arnie buys Christine, he has a flat on the way as they're driving to the garage where he's going to store Christine. And he has a flat, and then he has to pull over in front of somebody's house, and then the people who own the house are just like, "You get that mechanical asshole out of here! We're gonna beat the shit out of you or something." I'm like, I've never seen anybody be that angry at somebody having a flat tire. In fact, I've never seen anybody be angry at somebody else having a flat tire and having to park in front of their house. It's not very realistic. I mean, we all know people can be serious assholes, but it's like an overload of assholery in the beginning of this book. Because again, he's just laying it on a bit thick. Every adult almost, actually, the majority of the characters that Arnie interacts with in the opening portion of this book just treat him like complete shit. The guy that owns the house where he has the flat is going to beat up a teenage kid because his car had a flat, and then the guy who owns the garage where he's going to store Christine is just like reads in the riot act for no reason whatsoever. And then Arnie's mom is just this completely insufferable bitch, and it's just a bit much. And that is um, the main criticism that I have against it is that Stephen King kind of again laid it on a bit thick there in the early pages, trying to set up the character of Arnie and his plight. It was just a bit much, and it was kind of cartoonish a little bit. But beyond that, Lee Cabot, who is Arnie's and then Dennis's girlfriend in this, our female lead character in this. We all know Stephen King has some weird um, issues with women, I think, or at least with writing women. I think he has some very strange ideas regarding femininity, and the books where women feature prominently in the stories are, hit or miss oftentimes. And this one was kind of a miss in that regard because Lee, she's not a very strong character. All she does is cry a lot. She doesn't really contribute much, and of course, she's just sexualized to the nth degree. And that's partly excusable because the book is narrated partially by Dennis Gilder, who is, an adolescent male. So that's partly excusable, but still, it just kind of, it lays it on a bit thick in that area as well. So there are some weak elements to this, but by and large, I think Christine is really a knockout. Honestly, there's a subplot in this book about like organized crime and Arnie getting involved in like running contraband for the guy who owns the garage named Will Darnell, who's runs illicit substances and materials and stuff. And it stood the chance, it really did, of fumbling all that. and becoming something unwieldy and clunky, but it didn't actually. It all kind of ties together quite well actually. And again, I kind of have to marvel at how well Christine came off. Again, this premise really could have been something that just bombed hard, but it doesn't. Actually, Stephen King gets a lot of miles out of it. Yet again, another car pun. But yeah, so to rate Christine by Stephen King, I'm giving this book an A minus. That's one of the highest ratings I think I've ever given a Stephen King book, but it earns it in my opinion. I really do think that Christine is one of Stephen King's finest accomplishments as a writer. I freaking love this book. It held up remarkably well, I think, and again, I would place it in the upper echelon of Stephen King's oeuvre. So, Christine by Stephen King. Have you read Christine? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I've said here today. And if you have not read Christine, oh hell yes, I could recommend this. This is truly kind of a masterpiece, I think. It really is. I love it. I could recommend it. If you haven't ever read Christine and you're into Stephen King, give it a go. Absolutely. It deserves to be read. And if you've never read a Stephen King book, I could recommend starting with this. I think this demonstrates what he can do at his best. Because this was right from the heyday. This was early 1980s. That was prime Stephen King era. So yeah, I could definitely recommend it. Christine is, I think, a knockout. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.